What is the difference between looking for something and running away from something? When you come onto a spiritual path, or when you go anywhere for that matter, there's two ways of getting there. One way is actually moving toward where you want to go. The other is getting there because you are moving away from something that's in the other direction. So for example, in order to get to Rishikesh from Delhi, there's two ways you can do it. One way is you head off to Rishikesh and you figure out, I've got to find some way to get to Rishikesh, whether it's an airplane, whether it's a train, whether it's a car, whether it's a bus. Not many people are walking it anymore, but some vehicle I've got to find to get me there. My vision is on Rishikesh. But another way to do it is, I hate Delhi, I've got to get away from Delhi. And we push against Delhi, move away from Delhi, and if we happen to be pushing against Delhi in the northern direction, and we do it enough, you'll end up in Rishikesh. So the end result is the same, but there are two very, very distinct paths. And when we talk about, as the question asked, the difference between searching for something versus running from something else, this is what we're looking at. On a spiritual path, it's very similar. Some people come onto a path because it's, I'm dying to see the divine, to experience the divine. Life is great as far as the things of life go, but I want something more. I want to experience the divine by whatever name, whatever form, but I want that experience. I want to expand my consciousness, connect with who I really am. Another way is, I'm really hurt. Life hurts. I am therefore going to move to an ashram, start meditating, take up yoga, do all of the things on a spiritual path. Now, it's not that one is right and one is wrong, but I like the question because it implies a level of self-awareness. Very few of us are aware of how we ended up where we got. And the difference between moving toward versus moving away. What's important about it is, if I come onto a spiritual path only because I've been running away from something, first of all, it's not going to go very deep. It'll last only as long as the pain that we're pushing against is. So someone broke my heart. I lost a loved one. I was fired from my job. Whatever it is, it stings. To get away from that sting, I start meditating. I move to an ashram. I join a spiritual community. Now, if I keep my agenda, my inner agenda, being only to be free of the pain of the person who broke my heart, the pain of losing my job, the pain of losing my loved one, then the minute that time heals that, which inevitably it will, I discover, oh, I don't actually really like living in an ashram. Or, oh, I'm actually way too busy to keep up my meditation practice. Or, I don't really like these people of my Sangha much anyway. It was just, they were there when I had no one else. And so what you find is that the spiritual life becomes simply an escape. Better than alcohol, better than drugs, better than, binge watching TV serials. But it doesn't really take you into the depths of what it can offer. Now, before we go into the other way of getting here, there is another possibility. That you come onto the spiritual path, perhaps in response to something that's happened, perhaps pushing things away. Whether it's just the stress of the world you're living in, a professional world, a very busy metropolitan world. So you may come by pushing that away. But if once you are on the spiritual path, once you are in the ashram, or once you're meditating, or once you've connected with the Sangha, you actually allow it to touch and expand your heart, then it doesn't matter why you got in. It's like a lot of people say, oh God, in the West, people are only getting into yoga to look good. And I always say, I don't mind why people get into yoga. Of course, yoga is a very, very deep and profound practice that includes much more than the physical asanas that we do that might get the body in shape. But to say somebody came into yoga only to get in shape, and therefore that's wrong, undermines the power that yoga has. Doesn't matter why you get in. Yoga has a power in and of itself that even if you got into it to lose weight, or you got into it because you had a bad knee, or you got into it because you liked the clothes, because you thought they were cute, you needed an opportunity to wear your yoga pants. Whatever the reason was that you got into it, Dhanyavadbhya. Yoga itself has a power. And that power, that Shakti, grabs you and transforms you. So in the same way, if you come into a spiritual path, even if you think that you're coming just to get away from the stress, or to get away from a difficult relationship, or to get away from something that was paining you, if you allow yourself to really open to the magic of meditation, of prayer, of yoga, of living a life that's focused on spirit rather than focused on matter, that's really the difference in a purely semantic way. A spiritual life is a life focused on spirit. A material life is a life focused on matter. No judgment, no better than or worse than. Just a semantic difference. We focus on essence rather than form. So we focus on the soul, the spirit, the truth of who you are, rather than the vehicle you've come in. So if you allow yourself to really open to that, it's going to transform you. And so it doesn't matter why you got in, as long as you really allow it to touch you. And that it doesn't become just a band-aid for your brokenness. This is something we had started speaking about last night in terms of meditation and psychoanalysis. Because sometimes spirituality can be used just as a band-aid. I don't want to think about something that's hurting me, so I will just do my mantra instead. Well, in some ways, that's a great practice. One of the great benefits of having a mantra is when you find your brain, your mind going off in dysfunctional, non-helpful, pain-inducing directions, you have a mantra to give it instead. But if there's something really important in your life you need to look at, not just the nonsense of the mind doing its thing, not just the constant commentator, the constant critic, not just that, but if there's actually something in your life you need to look at, well, the answer is not, how can I ignore it and just chant my mantra instead? So we have to allow ourselves to open to the fullness of the path and not just use it as a band-aid. And allow that, the real depth of it, because the joy that spirituality gives us is not the joy that's just the opposite of stress. It's a full joy. And if we're simply using it as an antidote to the stress, if we're simply using it as an antidote to the pain that we're experiencing, then we're cutting ourselves short. We're not committing a sin. It's not a problem. I mean, whatever reason you do your mantra, whatever reason you pray is great. There's not a wrong reason to do it, but you're cutting yourself short. Spirituality has a lot more to offer. So whether you've come to it running toward, or whether you've come to it running away, either way, don't worry. The question is, now you're here. How you got here doesn't matter, now you're here. Did you push against Delhi, or did you aim for Rishikesh? Now you're here. And now once you're here, the question is what to do. How do I open myself fully to the power, the possibility of where I am? Because there are no mistakes. There's no mistakes in the universe. That doesn't mean everything feels good. Many of us think, oh my God, this is really painful. I must have made a mistake. We were never promised a life without pain. We were never promised a life without trouble. What we were promised was the possibility of actually discovering who we are, of actually living a full life, a conscious life, an awake life. And yeah, along the way, there's moments of pain. I remember saying to saying to Pujya Swamiji at some point, through just streams of tears, nobody ever told me that when you annihilate my ego, you take my heart with it. You know, because we talk so frequently about the annihilation of the ego on the spiritual path, and that sounds really good. I mean, anybody want to give up their ego? Sure. But, I mean, right, we're all aware on some level that it's kind of our worst enemy and gets us into trouble in all sorts of ways and never gets us into a good situation, never leaves us feeling really good about ourselves. But what we don't necessarily realize is how the arms of the ego, like an octopus, have sort of wrapped themselves around so much of how we identify, including our emotions, including our hearts. And so it doesn't always feel good in the same way that having, you know, a tumor removed does not feel good. On the other hand, you need to do it if you want to live. You know, if everybody in a hospital said, forget it, doctor, this is way more painful than I had thought, forget it. The food is bad. There's no fresh air. I'm sorry? Yeah, exactly. Forget it, I want out. You could get out, but in a short period of time, you'd probably find that the tumor had taken over your life, or taken your life. And in the same way, when we struggle with our ego, when we struggle with our desires, when we struggle with our fears, when we struggle with... They're all aspects of the ego. But when we struggle with these, it's an operation of sort. And it's not always fun. Doesn't always feel good. On the level that we've become used to things feeling good. On the level of making our ego feel good about ourselves, making our hearts feel good about ourselves. And it's always on this very superficial level. Oh my God, you are so beautiful. Oh my God, you're so smart. Oh my God, what you just did was so great. This is how most of us are used to living. You're the best. That's what feels good to us. And when on the path it doesn't feel good, whether in meditation we find ourselves face to face with aspects of ourselves that are darker, than the people we're scared to, read about in the news. When we discover aspects of ourselves that have darkness, face to face with our own darkness, face to face with our own shadow, face to face with our own I don't like to say negative sides, but our other side, our darker side. It feels a lot better to run from that. When we find ourselves on the path, however we got here, running from or running toward, we need to understand we're here for a reason. And to allow ourselves to really open up. Because underneath it all, it is beautiful. Underneath it all, it is just nothing but grace. But to get there, it's like, when we perform the yajna in the ceremony on the banks of Ganga and we offer into the fire. One of the meanings of that which we offer into the fire is, it's a mixture of seeds. And the symbol of that is that the seed is a symbol of our ego. If you take a seed and you plant it in fertile ground, shine the sun on it, you water it, that seed is going to sprout. And then it's going to get roots. And then later when you want to uproot it, it's going to be very difficult. It's much easier to uproot a sapling than to uproot a tree. And our egos, in the same way, when they grow their roots into us, they grow their roots around our hearts, around our identities, around our emotions, around everything that we think of as me. And then someone comes along, or a practice comes along, or our higher nature comes along and says, I've got to uproot this thing. It feels like it's pulling all of us out with it. And this yajna, the symbolism of that is that if you take a seed and you roast it before you plant it, you actually can never get it to sprout. Doesn't matter how good the soil is, how much rain, how much sun, the seed will never sprout. And so when we perform the ceremony, through the seeds we are offering our ego with this prayer of, oh God, roast my ego, literally, roast the seed of my ego, so that no matter who tells me I'm wonderful and perfect, or who tells me I'm horrible and worthless, because both of them are ego. I'm the best is also ego, and I'm the worst is also ego. I deserve much better than this is ego. I deserve nothing at all is also ego. Ego's not just arrogance, how we typically tend to use it. The ego is that whole false sense of who we are, whether we think we're the best or we think we're the worst. So we offer the seeds. Oh God, roast the seeds of my ego, so that regardless of what happens in my life, that seed will not sprout, and these roots will not grow in me, so that when I want to remove the ego, when I want to become free of it, I can. And the last part to just mention on this subject in terms of ego is we talk a lot about being egoless, having no ego. This is very, very difficult. It's nearly impossible, particularly if you're moving in the world, because it's the ego that says, I'm the one over here, and you're the one over there. Being totally egoless would live every single minute and every moment with an awareness that just, I'm soul, you're soul. There is not even your soul, I'm soul, but just there is nothing but soul, singular, not plural, not souls, but soul. And we're all just different vehicles, different waveforms of the same ocean. But to move through the world like that is really difficult. But in order to become free of the ego, you don't actually have to no longer have an ego. You don't have to annihilate it completely in order to be free of it. And that I have found to be a much more doable goal. Is, okay, I can still lose sight of the fact that we are just soul. I can forget that this is just a vehicle, and I can slip back into a sense of this is me and that's you. But if I don't allow that to bind me, to chain me, then I'm still free of it. It exists. I haven't annihilated it completely. I have to maintain a watchful eye over it, so it doesn't, decide to try to run the show again. But with that watchful eye, with that witness, with that awareness, that mindfulness, I can still have an experience of self, knowing that that's not the highest truth, but knowing that I'm not there yet, and yet not have the ego be the dictator. Not have the ego say things to me like, how dare he say that? I'm going to show him a thing or two. Not having the ego call the shots. Not having the ego say to me, oh my God, I can't believe you did that. That was so horrible. You are the worst. Because the ego can exist without running the show. And if we can try to work to first become free of it, so that it's still there, but it's not pulling our chains. We're not puppets that, marionettes, and it's just pulling the strings and we're dancing accordingly. Slap this one, hug this one, based on what they've said or done to me. Run here, run away from here, based on which way makes me feel good. If I can stop dancing according to the way it pulls the strings, then it may still exist in me, but I'm no longer its slave. And that becomes really